So just remember the position papers state this is like a conjunctive declarative statement. And what it basically means is this is you have to agree with the total thread all the way through in order for your group to agree with this position. So it has autonomous vehicles, ones that take complete control of the cars. That's important for you to be able to identify because autonomous vehicles, we actually are driving autonomous vehicles now. If you have cruise control, that's a stage one autonomy. Park assist is a different level. It's like 2 or 3. Dynamic cruise controls with emergency braking systems, that's a level 3. But I want this to be about autonomous vehicles, ones that take complete control of driving. They have their best chance, okay, to be able to be sold at regular automobile dealerships, okay, where they can be compared features with other regular automobiles, okay? So when your group kinds of measure this, what has to be true is that all of these statements have to be true as well, all right? So, let me put regular automobiles so you know that. And so if you don't need to compare features to be able to accept that autonomous vehicles will be successful, if I just cross out one of these, then the entire statement is false, all right? If I can't say that regular dealerships are unnecessary and I cross that out, then the statement is false. A conjunction sentence means this and this and this and this. And if all of those things are true, okay? So if all of these things are true, it means that the final statement is true, all right? But if one of these in your definition is false, then the entire statement is false, all right? That's the way you think of it. Think of that in your groups. And just remember, as I've said, citations mean A's. So cite me some things on that. Cite just not the autonomous vehicles, but cite the history of autonomous vehicles, how they're being sold, and the value, remember, of automobile dealerships and the thought of comparing the features, okay? So that's how you frame it, all right? I know some people have already sent it to me. That's cool. I'm okay with that, okay? All right, so let us move on. And we are going to finish talking about channel power. And so we talked about the 5 sources of power, went through all of them, their uniqueness, and we ended when talking about mediated power and unmediated. Now we're going to talk about the flip side. We're going to talk about, in essence, the one thing that you can't talk about when it concerns power, but dependence. Not surprisingly, whenever you measure power, there's a strong corollary to dependence as well. And dependence can be in many different factors, but basically has to do with the need or the desires for something that another individual partner has. And we recognize that when B depends more heavily on A, that is a definition of dependence. And so we actually use this in a formula. So we look at 2 things that determine whether something is dependent or not. The first is, do I gain a greater utility from A? Do I get a value or the benefits to the arrangement? Is there a personal satisfaction? And those things are critical. The psychological things are just as critical as the monetary things are. What do I bring to the table that makes this relationship acceptable and even one that I wish to continue? The other is, whether there are other sources of that utility that I consider important, or let's just say this, what are the lack of them? Is my particular source of A, are there any alternatives? And it is the scarcity that also increases our dependence as well. And so we use the formula, which is D equals U times S, all right? And that times is going to make a play in a couple of minutes, okay? Just thinking of an actor's power as another actor's dependence is useful because you think about the underpinnings of where power is. And so one of the things that I am trying very much to do with the summit is I'm hopefully trying to build benefits and satisfaction from my particular speakers. And that is a way, hopefully, of building what I would consider to be a positive dependence, because I want to appreciate the actors who are coming here, and I want them to know that they have value. And so if they derive utility for being here, hopefully their satisfaction is more, and they will realize that there was a good feeling to come out of this. I'm dependent on them desperately. And I'm hoping that in a mutual dependence, they can depend on me. And so how do we access dependence? And is there a way of numbering what dependence actually is? If I'm trying to tally up the benefits that my firm offers to another, well, there's three ways I can do it. One is I can recognize my channel partner's goals. What do my speakers desire? How do I think they're important? If I recognize my channel partner's goals, and I provide them with some offering that helps meet their pursuits, then I have increased my value or my benefits to them. So there are several things that I'm trying to do in putting my mind into theirs, because I've done speaking engagements before. So a couple of things I'm doing. One of them is I'm assigning a GA to do nothing but work with the speakers and provide for them. They'll have one person to deal with. I have that one GA who will rotate around just to make sure their needs are taken care of. The second is that I've arranged for a conference room to be there only for the speakers. So if they need a private place to go work or study before or after their speech, they've got a place to go. We're also going to get coffee, tea, drinks. We're going to try to fulfill every need that I never got fulfilled with when I was a speaker, all right? I want them to understand that we appreciate them and that they are special. And that's how this is, or that's why it's important. And so that's the first thing, is I'm creating utility in my actions. The next is I try to figure out scarcity. Who are my potential competitors in what I'm doing? And how do I measure what a competitor is? If I am an automobile manufacturer in 1999, and I have a customer who's looking for alternative sources of propulsion, how many options are out there? Not many. Yes, you're probably looking at some experimental. You probably got hydrogen fuel cells. You do have a few electric vehicles out there, but they're not production. Fast forward to 2023, Tesla's the largest automobile manufacturer in the world now. All right, and there are certainly greater alternatives right now. And I've even heard Toyota in 2024 is going to come out with a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle. Well, they actually have one in production now, but it's used in Japan.
I think you can buy them here in America.
Yeah, they're mostly in California where you've got the hydrogen storage places. And once again, all of that also is about infrastructure. And that's what Tesla and all the other electric vehicles have been trying to build for years now. I personally, I would be very much interested in the hydrogen fuel cell vehicle for several reasons. Just my personal, but my interesting thing always that I think is that Toyota has not jumped into the total electric vehicle yet, which means they've got a surprise coming up to me. I think it'll be dry lithium, which has enormous advantages over liquid lithium. So anyway, you look at how much value you bring, you look at your alternatives, and ultimately that can determine your value. Now, in a multiplication problem, if one of these is 0, what is this ultimate value? If utility is 0, I provide no utility, or there is no scarcity, what will be dependence? 0. It's simple, all right? And so, if I have no scarcity, in other words, I'm easily replaced. If I provide no unique value to my customers, then I have no utility, I have no scarcity, there is no dependence on me. And so that's a way of measuring our dependence or the dependence our actors need with us. There are other couple of ways, trying to find hardwired ways of knowing exactly how to look at it. One of them is, what is the percentage of sales? This is one way of hopefully fixing a quantitative measure about how much dependence one corporation has on me. And so the higher the percentage the corporation is part of their percentage of sales or profits, the greater the importance that they need me. The difficulty with this is that it can't capture or assess scarcity directly. It might quite simply be that locally you're the only game in town. And it just might be as a value of position where you are. You might be capturing a predominant amount of Mount Airy, but if you were to move that over to, say, Hickory, where there's 350,000 people, you just may be a minor player. So it's kind of hard to actually really know. The next is role performance. How much do I empathically believe or help the others? We all have roles that we play in our lives. I'm a professor, I'm a teacher, I'm an organizer, I'm a dad, and I'm a brother, and all of those things. And each one of those is a role that I play. And each one of us has roles that we play with each other, and especially when it comes to friendships. It's a normal thing. In the roles that we play with friendships together, it's not unusual. The research shows us that after 6 to 8 weeks, if individuals start gathering together, you'll find that they'll start similarly dressing like each other and even talking in the same tones and inflections. It's a normal thing, all right? Because the roles that we perform ultimately determine our values in the relationships we're in. It's interesting to note that the role performances have changed dramatically over the last 5 years. I can give an example. We went to Concord for my daughter's cheer competition. And 5 years ago, there would have been no expectation whatsoever that my bed sheets would have been changed every day. That doesn't happen. Okay. Now, that only happens if I ask for it. And I usually leave a pile of towels there because they're not picked up every day either. And what was considered standard service is now considered service excellence. But if you're willing to invest in that, you may to experience, which is the one thing that marketing believes in more than anything else, it confers a uniqueness on it if your performance is excellent. And so that's one of the things, once again, that I'm trying to perform. Hopefully with you, which is extremely important, but the only way that I can bring that to you is by bringing it to the speaker.
Thank you.
I put myself in the role of the speakers, and I want to bring excellence to them, and I also want to bring excellence to you. I want you to fulfill whatever your dreams are, and so that's why I'm standing here. The final thing that we can do is the bottom-up approach, where it's an inventory of all of the 5 sources. It's a little bit difficult, a little bit more nebulous, because those changes may, depend very much on the dependence of the influencer, because they're all locked together. So it's not really one of the better ones. Your role performance, to me, it may be the more valuable one. I'm not sure you'll have a test question on that, but it's all enveloped in what you can do to create an experience that ultimately creates a scarcity. There may be others out there that are doing the same thing you're doing, but nobody can do it better than you. And that's what you can invest in. Remember this. Power is not the property of organizations. Power is the property of the relationships. Powerful may only be powerful in relationship or relation to X, the individuals in between. Furthermore, dependence is never one way. And a matter of fact, high mutual dependence is synonymous with high mutual power. Myself and Dr. Albinson were very highly dependent on each other. When my dad was dying for 3 years, she let me once a month drive down to Mississippi to go see my dad. And now her father's going through the same things, and she's in Sweden. We support each other. And so we both have high mutual power, but the mutual power also is in the reasoning not to use or exercise it, but to respect it. Now, here's a problem. Rarely is power balanced. There is usually an asymmetric balance of power. One side is stronger than the other. And what happens with this is you have the concept of agency theory, and we'll talk about agency theory later, is that both sides have a different view of how they see the world. The less dependent member finds the power, and they understand it. Whereas the more dependent member feels exposed. They're concerned with their exposure to being exploited. And asymmetric relationships generally suffer, and even worse is they will suffer also when the stronger member has some declines as well. So 2 examples, Toys R Us, when which one was it? The Last Jedi came out, and they were in financial strains, spent something to the effect of $120 million in Star Wars merchandise. And unfortunately, the movie cratered, not in financial terms at the box office, but as far as merchandising goes, which usually is 3 to 4 times the amount of money spent than the movie, it crashed and it took Toys R Us with it. And so that's where a weaker member can suffer when a stronger member doesn't. Radio Shack. Radio Shack should be right now in play for one of the greatest booms of all time, because the do-it-yourself mood is really prevalent, especially among your generation. And Radio Shack would have been perfect. But the problem was in the 90s, Radio Shack shifted a lot of their business to cell phones. And the difficulty with cell phones, especially then and even now, is the amount of time that you normally have to spend with an individual solving their problems. And so it meant that the average browser who would come into a Radio Shack to buy a few things didn't have a salesperson even to ring them up. And so they simply went out and never came back. And when the cell phone industry moved out of the Radio Shacks into other locations, and you started to see franchise stores like AT&T and T-Mobile, well, they went out of it as well. Asymmetric relationships tend to be conflict laden. They're not as trusted. There's not as much commitment to an interdependent relationship. And there's always the need to let the more dependent member to feel prepared to find some way of equaling the balance. It's kind of the DNA part. And so there are 3 countermeasures that the weaker party can do. And so the first one is you find an alternative for A, and this is the most common. If you were to come up with a multiple choice question and ask the most common one for balancing dependence, this is the one. When you're balanced on a single level, what you try to find a way is increasing more legs to the stool. By God, this one needs one. To be able to keep it firm. That's a perfect example, okay? So generally, it involves the ability to add a second supplier or more. And so an example of this is automobile dealerships were traditionally just one brand, GM. You might have the whole list when you had Ford, Pontiac, Buick, Chevrolet, Pontiac, Buick, and Cadillac, but you generally stayed in the GM banner. Well, the problem with that is that the fortunes of GM are also the fortunes of the dealerships, and they started feeling vulnerable. If you look at the previous slide, and now you see places like modern Toyota are also modern Subaru and modern Ford, and basically spreading those out into multiple different brands. So my son, his grandmother passed away and she left him money to buy another vehicle. And so the natural thing I did was spend, hours looking at, vehicles online. And I happened to see one in a small place called Andalusia, Alabama, population 3,000. And it was a small automobile dealership. They just gotten in a Cadillac CTS SUV, under $8,000. It had 70,000 miles on it. I got the Carfax out and looked at it. They changed the oil religiously every 5,000 miles, or if they drove under one 6-month period, they only drove 600 miles. That's sounding like to me an elderly couple, if you're asking me, but they still got the oil change every 6 months. So as soon as I saw that, I called them up. I asked them, my son and I went to the dealership. It was a cream puff. It was beautiful. And so we dealt with it right there. And so I was talking to the dealer and I was asking him, well, don't you have difficulties with what you're doing now? And he said, yeah, we can't bargain on just walk-in traffic anymore. They were the GM dealership, they were a Ford dealership and a Chrysler dealership all in one. He said, we're not going to be able to make it on walk-in traffic. Then I said, well, how many cars you sell online? And he said, 52. This is a little place, 3,000 people, Andalusia, Alabama. And this was their way of handling dependents. They were able to find more alternatives. And so that's one of the ways that you can do it. The next is, especially when you're getting strong armed, you organize a coalition. From one comes many, e pluribus unum. Yep. So what you do is, in GM in the 50s had a problem, or what, not necessarily a problem. They were going to decide to vertically integrate everything inside of General Motors. In other words, they were going to be Tesla 70 years before Tesla. They were going to start manufacturing from the beginning, have company stores in the middle, all the way down to the consumer for money. That's the only reason why. I read the stuff. They weren't trying to bring better stuff to the customers. They just want to make more money. What did the franchise owners do? They formed a group, a coalition. They formed United, what was it called? United States Automobile Dealerships, GM Dealerships of America. I forgot what it was. And all 4,000, 5,000 GM dealers got together and literally, in terms of a power, a coercive thing, said, drop it. This was also time during the 50s when it was very much what we would consider a production economy. They were selling as many as they possibly could. And they were talking about the dealerships walking out one day and the next day coming with a Ford van. And so GM realized the error of their ways and decided no. The last is just get out. We're done. Stab us with a fork. We're done. Okay. You just not only withdraw from the organization, you withdraw from the entire business. You stop doing it completely. IBM did this in 2000 when they got out of the desktop business and decided they no longer wanted to hassle with Seagate and all the other companies who wanted a piece of IBM and the three big blue letters, and said it's not worth our effort to try to fight 30 or 40 other corporations, and we're just another computer on the shelf. In 2007, they followed the same thing by selling their laptop division to Lenovo. And so the ThinkPad actually is an IBM designed laptop if you still want to try for one. And they've done pretty well. So here's the problem. I've said good things about Walmart. Here's a bad thing. Walmart, at the very end of the, what do I want to say, the negotiation process, right when you're about to sign the contract, will demand some kind of stipulation. So I had a professor who had a friend who made trolling motors in Arkansas. And the trolling motors were great, all right? And Walmart was about to sign a contract that would take 2/3 of their yearly production and put them in a Walmart store. Well, there's the old saying, if I owe $1,000, the bank owes me. If I owe $1 billion, I own the bank. Well, this is one of those situations where they owed $1,000. Walmart said, we want you to cut the cost by 15% to us. And they were forced to give up using steel pins inside the motors and go to plastic. They went away from stainless steel propeller blades, went to plastic ones. They reduced the quality in order to be able to survive. And that is the bad use of power. When we talk about power, it's not used for the good system-wide. It's only used for the good of one individual. And that's when it fails. And so their solution could have been just get out, just bail. So what do most corporations do in an asymmetric dependence? Well, the truth is that generally you go along. You accept the situation and you try to make the best of it. And that's usually what happens. Because actually, whether you're in a predictable market or an unpredictable one, you do have compelling reasons to stay in. If it's a predictable market, you always got predictable demand, you're always making money, maybe not as much as you want. You don't have to take price reductions on your goods. You're paying your bills, you're amortizing your loans, you're capitalizing all your net worth, and the business is in survival, and it's good. In an uncertain market, it's actually preferable to have a high mutual dependence. There's a motivation for you to stick together in the tough times. Try to find ways of creating solutions with each other. And so those aren't bad things. The business keeps rolling, you're moving along. Maybe it's not perfect, but it's better than nothing, which it can often be. And so those are the roots of dependence and how we go about looking at dependence in relationship to us and with our channel partners, and its balance in relationship with power. Remember, much also is that power is based on the relationships we have. And if we have no relationship, many times we have no power or dependence. And so the last part we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about strategies in which to influence others. How do we vocalize power without coming across as powerful, I guess is the better way to say it. Because influencing requires some level of, what's the word I want to use? Understanding by the other party and recognizing reasons for accepting your needs. How are you able to convert the potential from influence into influence? You have to communicate. How do I communicate in a positive way, using power, and hopefully get party B to agree with us? All of us have used these influence strategies. You may not have used these particular words, but all of you have done this in one way or another. Oh, one other thing to say, this is not on the test or anything. It'll be in another, we'll talk about relationships, but people are really bad actors. You know, I mean, if you're not sincere, I mean, no matter how well you try to hide it, most people know, okay? Henny Youngman used to say, the most important thing in life is sincerity, and if you can fake that, you've got everything. But, you know, sincerity goes a long way. I mean, it's without verisimilitude, you really, really mean it. And so if you don't mean it, it's hard to have any influence. And so these strategies have to go along with your desire to really drive your goals, okay? And so we have 6 influence strategies. Don't have 6 fingers. We have 6 influence strategies, and I'm gonna write them on the boards so I can talk about them one at a time. And each one of these is a verbalized communication strategy that each one of us uses.
This won't be on the test.
Oh, probably will.
Oh, well.
This will be, all right. Yeah, these strategies will be. So, influence strategies. Now, if it's a good thing you brought that up, just remember this, your final test will be online and it's going to be multiple choice. So you'll be able to see your grade immediately after that. That's why I did it that way. Okay, so you may not see these listed, but you may get an instance where you say, you know, if someone wishes to punish you, the communication strategy is a threat. That would be how you would see it. Okay. So the first is a promise. And that is to do what we want, and we will reward you. The next is a threat, and it's exactly what it sounds like, which is don't do what we want. And we will punish you. The next one is legalistic. And this one is do what we want because you've agreed to. These first three generally are the most damaging because it does not require consent or your acceptance for them to be brought. There is no compromise, no prevarication. It's direct, sometimes kind, sometimes not. But it basically states, whether you wish it or not, it's transactional in nature. If this happens, all right? The last three are much more nuanced, a lot deeper, and you would be surprised the power of a simple request. Please do what we want. Now, there's an old saying by Robert Heinlein, never appeal to a person's better nature because they may not have one. But having said that, if a person does have a better nature, sometimes it is amazing the power of the word please. You're asking for their help. You're not demanding it. And the request sometimes falls on deaf ears, but many other times they will help you when they can. When you go to your doctors, just to give you a little advice here, all right? Realize if you have difficulties, your doctor is a human being just like you are. If your difficulties have to do with like insurance or things like that, tell them. They have to fight these same problems every day. And if you're honest with them, they'll try to find solutions. They're not in the business of, making money for, the insurance companies. They're in the business, hopefully, to try to get you well. And so sometimes don't be afraid of requesting. You might be surprised, okay? The next is information exchange. And there's a hole in this logic, but it's basically, let's sit down. And talk about the most profitable way to run your business. Difficulty with the information exchange is that, first off, nobody's just saying we're all going to sit down and talk about these things without trying to come down to a particular solution. The other part of that is that it tends to be a little bit wishy-washy in that you never ask, you never request their help. You're just basically throwing the information out there and hoping and showing them that it's the most profitable way. Now, granted, if they, are hopefully logical in nature, they will go along, but you're leaving that hole open. And the last is the recommendation. And this is based on the data. This is what you should do. Problem with this is that it leaves it open to skepticism and counter arguments. And you might finally have to do what I do with my kids when I try to do recommendations and just say, because I said so, that's fine. Okay. So, but the recommendations still do work. You're not just simply giving reasons or using them to cover up a threat. Okay. Now, realize, as I said, that a promise and a threat and legalistic often promote a backlash. It becomes an exchange, a tit for tat. Request, the exchange, the recommendations are much more subtle, much more nuanced, require much longer. And it's important that, especially if you're using the information exchange or recommendation strategies, that you have rational reasons that apply to them, not to you. And this is the importance to being a good actor and understanding the role model or the role play that you have to do with them. Put yourself in their shoes, think about what their desires are, and translate that into recommendations that they would consider valuable. Now, the interesting thing is that culturally, one individual's threat could be another culture's legalistic. All right. So I find that in Eastern cultures, in European cultures especially, there's a bluntness and a directness to go straight to the transaction reasons why, and to use promise and threats and legalistics in ways that we might consider resentful. But it has to do with the way that is culturally based. And so something coercive may be legitimate in another. I find this especially in individuals. Oh gosh, well, let's just say general in Europe, there is a tendency to lean hard on these influence strategies versus this in the United States, which tends to be a little bit more nuanced. I would even shift this even further and to talk about cultures in the East, and particularly Asian cultures, where it's very difficult to say the word no. And that in conversations, there may be an implied yes, when in fact, it might actually be no. It is amazing that we can find common ways in which we can talk with each other and ways that provide some conclusions to our negotiations. This is the point of why we have contracts, because contracts hopefully spell these things out in clear and unambiguous language. And so the effectiveness of the strategies many times are culturally based. And so we should measure which of the communication strategies we use based upon the audience that's receiving them. And as I said, this is just a personal thought. I think request has a lot more power than we give it credit for, because we don't use it much, you know? Because we also find that when we ask please, we're vulnerable, and that happens as well. But sometimes releasing a vulnerability in ourselves allows the other party to be vulnerable as well. It's a big risk, but I would use a request for the last moment. I would not use a reward or coercive. I would use a request. Try, please. So the last thing about these influence strategies is how do we frame it? All right. And so one of the ways that we measure framing is what's called valence. And valence is the pleasantness or unpleasantness you get it, of a situation. It comes from the Latin word root valent, which means strength, all right? And so in what positive pleasantness way, how do we take our request and put it in a way that is more desirable? In a positive way, you can say, if you take a new product, you will get substantial marketing support. That is positive valence. Negative valence is basically saying, if you don't take the new product, you won't get the new marketing support. And in the old statement, it is better to attract flies with honey than it is with vinegar. I think a positive valence is very important. And so whatever you can do, try to coach your requests in a way that is considered positive and one that also shows that they get some form of a substantial reward, although this is not truly reward power, but it is kind of in that way, okay? The last is condition. Do I have to perform in a way that's satisfactory for you to give me an achievement? It doesn't feel good to receive something if I feel like I have to perform. And so this contingent says, if you take the new product, we'll give you the Distributor of the Year award. That is a quid pro quo. For this comes this. And the problem with that is it sounds like a bribe. And its very nature, you can consider that as a bribe. The more desirable thing, the better thing, is to have someone act in a natural way, and because of their actions, they are driven to success. Congratulations, you've won the Distributor of the Year award. You haven't altered your behavior. It is your natural behavior that has earned you this trophy. Because it's the difference between giving something and earning something, which will always mean something more. And so in terms of framing strategies, it is better to use a positive valence and to use a non-contingent condition, and those will drive success. Okay, so we are finished chapter 10 on power. We will come back on Wednesday. Yes, you can mail it Wednesday night at 11:59 p.m. and I'll take it. And we will start talking about conflict on Wednesday. You all.
Have a good day, guys. Thank you.